morning and welcome to another FasTrax webinar. This is a weekly event we do every Friday at 9 a.m. Central, 10 a.m. Eastern, where we go over various topics of the FasTrax software. See a list of these events if you go to our website, FTx.com. Choose the FTx Lifeline at the top of the screen. Scroll down a bit, look for the webinar button, choose that. That will carry you to our webinars page, which will allow you to sign up for the newsletter to get notified of upcoming webinars and other FasTrax news, as well as see a list of our upcoming webinars to sign up for, and our previous webinar listing to view the recordings. Today we're going to be going over average cost in the retail software. And that's a different way of the system calculating and utilizing cost. Let's first go into Director, and we're going to go to the Pricebook. And we're going to take a look at the cost here real fast. So on our item details page, if we look at this carton I have, notice we have an average cost, a last cost, and a vendor part cost. Those three can be totally different. Now, the vendor part cost will be if you're purchasing this from your vendor right now. What is that going to cost you? That's going to be your vendor's cost as of this moment. The last cost of an item is going to be the last time you purchased this item from your vendor. What did you pay for it? So not necessarily what you pay right now, but what was the last time you purchased this? What did you pay for it? And then there's the average cost. And that's going to be an average weighted cost. Basically, what the inventory you have on hand and the different values, the potential different costs you receive that at, what is the average of those values? Now, first and foremost, to enable average cost, you have to be an administrator on your director login. You would choose the settings hyperlink, and there's an option here to use average cost. I've already got that enabled and turned on. So whenever you check that and choose save settings, it's going to make you restart a director. That'll enable average cost for the very first time. I've already done that, so we can see that I've got an average cost here. Now, the next step in utilizing average cost is setting that initial average cost value. And if you're in a corporate environment, this will have to be done at every store, the next step that we're about to do. So whenever you first enable average cost, that average cost is going to be $0 because it's not been enabled, so that nothing is set yet. So to set that average cost, what you do is you go to Mass Updates, and you'll go to the Average Cost tab here. That's a new tab that will be enabled. And then there's a Run Average Cost Utility button. And what this will do is, let me filter to an item here. What this will do is whenever you run this utility, of course it's going to run really fast here because I've got one, but it'll go through every single item in the price book. And it's going to copy that last cost value and place that to your average cost value. So you have a starting point. Now, if you already have an average cost set, it doesn't do anything. It just skips over that item. It only will set that average cost if that average cost is equal to 0. All right, so let's go back to the item and let's look at the average cost hyperlink. So if you're in a corporate environment, you can choose that average cost hyperlink here. You can pull from a specific store to get that average cost data, and it'll tell you the store number, store name, and their current average cost. This will allow you to set that average cost manually. It'll allow you to override that. So if I had an average cost here of, in the case I do, at $90, I could override that to $91 if I need to, and that would just set that new average cost value to a flat new value. Then you have the dollar amount hyperlink. And if you choose that, that will show you the average cost per store if you're in a corporate environment. I've got just one store here, so I can see that average cost. And then I can choose the detail, and that will tell you how that average cost value got into place. It'll show you like the initial time you run the average cost utility, and then every invoice you receive, because receiving that product is how that product is average cost is actually updated. Now you can change the last cost here and save that, but that doesn't factor into your average cost at all. The only time your average cost is going to be updated is 1, if you manually update that value, or 2, if you receive something on an invoice. When you're receiving it into your inventory, that's when that calculation is done. and it's going to be averaging your previous average cost and your new last cost for that on that invoice. That'll then calculate the new average cost. Whenever you view the detailer, that's just going to show you a listing of all of those values, where that average cost actually comes from. So if we go back to mass updates here, we also have the option to enter a new value to update the average cost too. And this will allow you to update the average cost manually by mass updates, by mass. Okay, so now let's look at receiving an item on an invoice and look at how that average cost gets factored. So if we go back to our item here, we can see that that average cost is $90. We're going to open a new director here. We're going to receive that item on an invoice. Go into my inventory module, go into receiving, I'm going to create a new invoice, and item. Receiving another 10. Let's say that I'm paying $100 for this. Okay, so I've applied that invoice, which had a new cost on there. So when I go back to this original director and I relook that item up, and I go to my item, we can see the average cost is now 95. Went up from 90 to 95. Reason being is I had 10 on hand before, and that average cost was $90. I received 10 more on that previous invoice that I just did at $100 each. When you average that together, your average cost is going to be $95. You can see here that my last cost updated as well, because that individual piece was $100 instead of $90. And my vendor part also updated too. It matches my average cost. Now I can update this last cost and we can see that it does not affect my average cost. I can put 95 here, save that, the item back up. Hasn't affected that average cost. I can change it to whatever I want, but that's not going to affect that average cost because I haven't received product into the inventory yet. I'm going to go ahead and put this back to where it was. We're going to receive another invoice, and we're going to look at how this value changes. Item in, I'm going to receive just 5 this time, and let's have it 97.50. We'll apply that. That item back up. You can see my last cost is updated, my vendor part is cost is updated, and so is my average cost. 95.50. Now I can go through, I can choose that, I can see the detail, and I can see where that comes from. You can see each invoice and where those values are. Here's the invoice, there's the old average cost. I received 10 on the invoice quantity. Here's my invoice cost. $90 is my average cost. I receive it at $95. There's my new average cost, $95.50. You can see here, there's the actual invoice values, $100 and $97.50. All right, so that's how average cost works whenever it's setting those values. Now, after you enable average cost, that's also going to change your reports and several other functions in the system. All these places where when you run reports and it shows your cost, that's now going to be based on an average cost, not the last cost. So whenever you're doing your department sales reports, your register Z reports, whenever you're doing a cycle count or a transfer, basically any functionality in the system that has a cost field is going to now be using the average cost and not the last cost. So always remember to take that into consideration. Even snapshots, whenever the system is building a snapshot, midnight every night, instead of using the last cost, it's now going to be based on an average cost. All right, so I hope everybody learned something new today. Average cost is a great way to look at a bigger picture of your inventory and not just look at the last cost. You can see a list of all these webinars we have at our website, FTx.com. Choose the Lifeline, FTx Lifeline button. Scroll down to the Webinars button. That'll let you see a list of all of our webinars on this page. If you have any suggestions on future webinar topics, let us know at info@goftx.com. If you have any questions on this topic or previous topics, let us know at websupport@FasTraxPOS.com. Thank you, and have a great weekend.